Welcome to the Changing Minds, Changing Lives podcast. Welcome back. My name is Julie Sowash. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Disability Solutions. We are a nonprofit based out of the United States that work with companies around the world to help them figure out how to meet people with disabilities where they are, hire them, retain them, and grow them within their organizations. This podcast is about changing minds and changing lives for our community. And I hope if this is the first time you are logging in and checking out either via YouTube or via your favorite podcast player like Spotify or Apple, that you check out some of our previous episodes. We've had some incredible interviews, and we're going to have some more and another one today. I want to welcome to the show today Calum Grevers, who is a disability and inclusion consultant, a public speaker, a policy researcher, a disability campaigner, who is also joining us today from Edinburgh, Scotland, which I just got to visit. We had a chance to talk about. So, Calum, thank you for joining Changing Minds, Changing Lives today.
Thank you.
So talk about, or just tell us a little bit about Calum.
Right. So before I want to preface this with talk about my disability. So I have muscular dystrophy. I use a wheelchair. And basically, I kind of discovered my passion for raising consciousness of disability issues and ableism from a campaign I started. So I think back in 2019, I was living in my parents' home, which wasn't accessible. And this was kind of affecting my mental health, my career prospects. And I think when you're in an unstable housing situation, it affects most aspects of your life. So basically what happened was I applied for social housing or public housing for American audiences. And basically what happened was I was put on this waiting list and was told I had to wait for a needs assessment, even though the local authority has plenty of information about my condition, about my situation from social work, from NHS, from other institutions. But basically I had to wait for this needs assessment. That was cancelled because of the pandemic for an indefinite amount of time. And I did a bit of research about how long I'd expect to wait. And there was a Freedom of Information request. It said the average waiting time was about 3 years for an accessible flat for disabled people. And obviously with the pandemic, there was a huge backlog. Demand was increasing because of the economic impact. These assessments had stopped. So basically, it was going to look like maybe 5 years before I could live independently and grow my career and basically just take my life to the next stage. So I'm like, I didn't really know what to do. There was like no real options. So my friends and family suggested I start a crowdfunding campaign. But I was like, I don't really want to perpetuate the narratives that disabled people should depend on charity and distract from kind of like the societal and systemic barriers that are putting me in the situation. So I kind of thought about how can I balance fundraising for myself with raising awareness of issues in housing, other barriers disabled people face, just to make it not just about me, because I don't want to feel like I'm kind of utilizing people's assumption that disabled people should rely on charity. But so I kind of tried to balance those two things. I wouldn't say it always worked perfectly. I did get the raise awareness of the issues. That definitely was successful. But sometimes you work with like the media, they're very they're trying to fit you into these old disability narratives, whether that's inspiration or tragedy or charity. And I think when you do these TV interviews, for instance, they edit it to the point that it emphasizes these stereotypes. It doesn't give you the nuance and it kind of just reflects what the audience already believes, if you know what I mean. So it was kind of like a difficult thing to balance. But in the end, I was successful. I raised £55,000 for an accessible flat. Basically allowed me to kind of purchase a quarter share of a flat and basically I pay lower rent on the rest, but it's fully accessible. And I think once I succeeded, I met with the Scottish Government to talk about housing policy. I felt it was very much a tokenistic gesture, really, because obviously I've been in the media a lot. They kind of wanted to maybe just make me quiet, I guess. So, I don't feel like I didn't secure the kind of meaningful change. I did make a lot of people aware. A lot of people came to me and said I had changed their knowledge and attitude completely to accessibility and disability, but the system didn't really change. But that's not to say, obviously, I achieved my goal, and I think I also proved to myself what's possible as an individual campaigner. And kind of like I built a huge network of people out of it on social media. And now with that, I kind of started a career as a disability consultant. And kind of life grew from there, really. It's changed quite a lot. In terms of like my confidence, my potential, I feel like I don't feel like the same person as I was 5 years ago.
Wow.
But one thing I would say is I also learned that you have to manage burnout and stuff like that. Because when you're campaigning as an individual for, I think it was about 2 years, and after that, I kind of have to know how to manage that. I don't think I managed it as I could. So I think the campaign stopped after that, and then I focused on my career.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's quite a journey. So, and there's quite a bit that I want to kind of unpack with you, if you don't mind. So basically, I think our American listeners kind of also have some assumption about most buildings being accessible for people with mobility challenges and those kind of things, which is not true in America, but in Europe and the UK, where buildings are substantially older and were built in sometimes completely different centuries, accessibility is a huge issue, especially for someone who uses a wheelchair. And so you were a young guy. You still look like a pretty young guy to me, ready to get out, start his career, do his thing. And what you found is not only was accessible housing not readily available, but then social housing that was also accessible was going to be basically 5+ years out for you. Is that right?
Yeah, based on that Freedom of Information request, that said the average waiting time, that was before the pandemic, that the average waiting time was 3 years. So if you think about the demand increasing by people who maybe lost their jobs through the pandemic or weren't earning enough, they might go towards social housing solutions. But it also means that home visits for needs assessments had stopped because you weren't able to visit people's homes because of the risk of spreading COVID. And obviously the pandemic went on, 2 years? So fetching that in, that's kind of what my impression was. They did actually, once I moved out, they asked me to do a needs assessment, not knowing that I had come off the waiting list. And that was after, I think that was in 2022, even though my campaign started in start of 2020, I think.
Yeah.
So
Like, nope,
yeah,
I'm good now. Thanks.
yeah, there's a lot of issues in the allocation system. Um, and obviously this information could be passed from another department, but there isn't enough communication or centralization between different areas. So they just repeat work.
Yes.
I've met social workers in the past. They have information about my situation, my disability, about it's all there already. So they could really streamline that process. I think.
Why do you think they don't streamline that process? Or what did you learn when you met with government officials about why this wasn't a priority?
Well, they did tell me things like there is accessibility requirements, there is regulations there. But for me, I think the issue is that because of cuts from 2010 to Cameron's government, the local authorities can't challenge developers in court if they don't follow regulations. They don't have the funds to be able to do that. And I think they have like a requirement of a certain proportion to be accessible, but it's not a high enough proportion. Because we think about there's an aging population, and obviously people age, so they develop disabilities, and it's better for them if they can stay in their own home. It's better for their physical health, their mental health, and also people think about what's the impact of a society where disabled people cannot enter able-bodied people's homes. It's a kind of form of segregation almost. So attitudes won't improve. It limits what's possible for a disabled person in terms of their life, their development of their life. But basically, I was kind of told that these are the things they're doing, but it wasn't really enough. I didn't feel they were really engaging. They come out with their kind of preset responses of things. So
They're politician responses.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't like, but I think something that you just said is really important is that, when people with certain types of disabilities can't fully interact with any environment, it is a form of segregation. And I've not heard it said quite that eloquently. And I think that that's something that really can hit home with our listeners.
Yeah, I think like obviously in terms of making friends, in terms of forming relationships, it's kind of very limiting in terms of the people you can interact with. And it kind of, I think, it's not just segregation, but it kind of makes people invisible. You don't see them in day-to-day life if wherever they go isn't accessible, if their homes aren't accessible. So it gives people a wrong impression of what disabled people can do, what the potential is. You just see it as this is the way it is. And I think the best way to change attitudes is simply the day-to-day interaction of able-bodied people and disabled people. I think that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, that just everyday interaction goes a long way.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so you were like, hey, I'm not going to be able to get into the social housing, so I've got to take action for myself, which again, I also love a couple of things that you said. One, you said, I have to be proactive. I have to figure out how to change my situation in the best way that I can. And then the other thing that you said that I think I just truly appreciated was that you wanted to make a good balance between I have needs and I need help with those needs, not because I'm a person with a disability, but because I'm a human who has needs, and not reinforcing stereotypes through your own messaging, I think is what you said,
Yeah.
that people with disabilities should only be viewed as charity. Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, I made sure that I emphasized that barriers were putting me in this situation, that I was having to crowdfund to remove those barriers. But I was always kind of clear that, it shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't have to crowdfund to find accessible social housing. And if I was focusing on, this is the condition I have, the needs I have, sometimes I felt like I was doing a disservice to all the work disabled activists have done to remove barriers and increase government support, things like that. But so that's why I wanted to balance it. But I think that was a wee bit of pride about trying to not ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with asking for help because everybody needs help with something. So I think that was more of a fear I had, but it didn't play out in reality. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just such an elegant point. You so often, and I live with mental illness, which is completely different than your disability. But for a long time, I was afraid to ask for help because I thought I needed to be able to fix it myself, that there was something innately wrong with me not being able to get my mind to work the way that I needed it to. And we have sort of an internalized ableism with ourselves, because why isn't everything built for me the way that I need for it to be built? And we almost put that guilt on ourselves. And I really appreciate your transparency in that part of the conversation, because I think, again, people who are not disabled need to hear frank conversations from people with disabilities about how we feel, that we want to have that same basic pride of living and engaging and, going to work day in and day out, just like everyone else does. But sometimes the environment isn't built in a way that we can function with it. And, that it almost hampered you in asking for the help that you needed, but ultimately driving towards the dream and the self-independence and now the productivity that you bring to the community.
I think you touch on quite an important point there is with internalized ableism, you kind of absorb this from able-bodied people, from the media, from just people around you, that it's something you have to hide and never burden anyone else with by asking for help. But people don't respond in that way you assume. People are more willing to help, or than you assume, and you're not really a burden on others. You're not. So I think it takes many years to actually unravel all this internalized ableism, and kind of just be yourself, willing to ask for help and not hide any aspect of yourself because of other people's attitudes. And I think it's quite pernicious, really, especially in the early stages of your life, if you're born with a disability. Because I'm 31. When I was growing up or in high school, most of that time social media didn't exist. And I think I wasn't so exposed to positive role models or authentic narratives. Because in the media, representation has improved a bit for people with disabilities, but it's still a long way than it is for other marginalized groups. So you get a complete wrong impression of who you are, what was possible for you. And it kind of never really fully leaves you, that attitude. It's always something you have to push away at the back of your mind, telling you that you don't deserve the support you're asking for. You don't, you're burdening other people and all this. But you always have to kind of push that away, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's again such a great point, and something I've been talking about, and you just mentioned, is I really feel not in every way, but in a lot of ways, social media has been such a positive driver for people with all types of disabilities, because
Mm,
we have social circles and people that we can see and connect with that are living lives like we're living, um,
mm,
and going about their daily business. And that's not just good for us as a community to have that and to build that sense of community, but it's really important for people without disabilities to see, as a part of exposure to their everyday lives.
yeah, and I think one aspect of this is the kind of like I grew up not knowing any other disabled people. I was only one in my class at school, or in the whole school, in fact.
Wow.
So, and also because of this internalized ableism, you're kind of like, as bad as it sounds, you don't want to associate yourself with other people going through similar things. So it's like it destroys that sense of community with other disabled people. And obviously that's kind of, that camaraderie is quite useful in terms of your mental health, in terms of speaking up when you face injustice. Um, so I think that's kind of a big aspect of it. So it wasn't until much later in life that I was connected with the disability community, and I saw disability as the result of barriers in society, as opposed to something wrong with me as a person, some
Yep.
failure of some kind. Um, and once I kind of saw it as a kind of identity, as a diverse community, that's when things really kind of changed in my life. And I realized that so much more is possible than you thought. But when you do that, you kind of get the sense that you have to compensate for lost time because of all the things you didn't experience when you were younger, because you had a kind of corrupted attitude to yourself and to disability.
So you've got some living and catching up to do, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Or the
So
feeling. Yeah.
as sorry, and now we kind of fast forward. You have now an apartment in Edinburgh still that is accessible,
Mm-hmm.
and you are now in the world of disability and inclusion consultancy. So tell me a little
Mm-hmm.
bit about this business that you've started, what some of your goals are, and some of the work that you are doing and want to do.
So basically, it kind of started by accident. I was, after building up this big network of social media, I wrote a post about the barriers I faced to work, about why my career is not where I'd like it to be, because of barriers in the benefit system, and attitudes of employers, stuff like that. And basically, that post went viral. And as a result, I was offered this kind of freelance opportunity. It was with it was a kind of university research project about support people with health conditions into employment, about the kind of workplace policies and government policies that need changed. So that was kind of my entryway in, just from that post. And since then, I've picked up various kind of freelance work. Some of it's disability inclusion training, some of it's just kind of general consultancy, some public speaking. And it's kind of a very varied career I've built out of this. Fell into it by accident, so it's interesting the way it works. Yeah.
So is this kind of the is this what you see kind of going forward for you in the future, is really growing your advocacy as well as your consultancy, not just around employment, but potentially just around the societal barriers to full inclusion?
Yeah, and I think it's about building a career that are about issues that affect me personally. So I have that passion for it. But it's also about making it financially viable. Just kind of finding that balance of activism and kind of working within the system. And for organizations, just trying to improve people's lives in some way. So I find it quite rewarding, it's quite fulfilling, but at the same time, you can't live and breathe disability stuff because it's not always good for your mental health long term. So it's still something we're trying to work with, how to manage that.
Yeah, it's a lifetime's worth of work, right? And sometimes it's really emotionally exhausting work. So this has been such a fun conversation. I've learned and thought about things in ways that I haven't before. So I want to thank you for that. As you know, we always end the podcast with 2 questions. And so the first one is, what is one thing that you would tell someone in leadership that would help change their minds about what people with disabilities bring to the table?
Well, I think first it's important to emphasize that the kind of social benefits of inclusive with disabled people, it isn't just about enabling me to do more. I think disabled people have so much to kind of contribute that workplaces don't think about. Like my lived experience is as valuable as my work experience. So, like, for example, disabled people live in a world that's not built for them. So as a result, it makes us creative. It makes us good at challenging old ways of doing things, always thinking of how something could be better or finding a new way of doing something. And our perspectives are different from able-bodied people. So I think when you have diverse perspectives, that improves decision-making. It makes you work harder to achieve consensus. And I think even just a kind of knowledge of disability and access. So the disability market globally is worth $13 trillion when you include disabled people's friends and family members. So obviously it's good for an organization's profitability. Just trying to look at the bigger picture when it comes to access. It's not just about me. For example, like there's this idea that accommodations are too expensive. But in reality, according to the Disability Business Forum, the average accommodation costs £75 and some of them cost nothing for working from home. They already have the resources. So there's all these myths about what it means to include disabled people, and it needs to be seen as an investment, not an expenditure, because that's really what it is at the end of the day.
An investment, not an expenditure. I love that. And what is one thing that someone has done for you that's helped change your life?
Well, I would say express my gratitude to all the people who donated to my campaign. I think it was about 2,000 people at the end of the day. And I was amazed by how much people engaged with the campaign. Were kind of keen to learn about disability, about accessible housing and stuff. So I just say thank you to all of them for kind of not just helping me move out, but also supporting my career and kind of giving me the opportunity to give something back through my campaigning as well.
Amazing. So if someone who is listening or watching right now wants to engage with you, Calum, where can we find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I recently started Instagram as well, where I'm going to talk about more personal lived experiences and stuff like that. And most of my consultancy work and public speaking, you can see that on LinkedIn mostly.
Great. Wonderful. Calum Grevers, thank you so much for the work that you're doing in our community. Thank you for joining us. And thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Changing Minds and Changing Lives. We'll catch up soon. Bye.
All right, thanks for having me. Bye.